Hello, my name is Niels Iversen and this is video number 6 in my series about language learning. Actually, I have not planned to make a 6th video, but when I was near the end of the previous one, I suddenly discovered that I spent all the time speaking about morphology and there was no time for the syntax. And that's also what you risk if you buy a small grammar or read the grammar section in a language guide. It's all about morphology and there's very little space left for the syntax. I'll try not to go into theoretical discussions about different grammatical frameworks. That's a nightmare. But I'll stick to some simple observations that can be used by language learners. And as usual, you learn complicated things by decomposing them into small and easy things. This was true for long words, which you should learn by cutting them up in the component parts. It was true for expressions where you should know the meaning for each and every word in an expression, even if the whole thing has got some special meaning which cannot be deduced from its components. It was true for training the ability to think in a foreign language where you start out with single words and you end up with complete sentences. And of course it also true for complicated sentence constructions which should be reduced to their component parts. Let's first have a look at a slightly complicated Danish sentence. That's my native language, which I found at a site called stonetranslation.com. Dem, som du lige sagde, at du havde hørt ikke var kommet, sidder i sofaen. Those whom you just said that you had heard had not come are sitting in the sofa. This is a perfectly valid sentence in Danish, and it exemplifies something called a sentence knot, sætningsknude in Danish. You also find them in, for instance, English and French, while they are totally impossible in many other languages. Now, how can you untie such a knot? Well, you can reduce it to a number of simple sentences which have become intertwined into one mess through standardized transformations. After that, you can make a graphical illustration of the structure. As you can see, it is something like a system of Chinese boxes with subordinated phrases within subordinated phrases within subordinated phrases inside a main clause. And there are some designated words that assure the connection upwards from each subordinated phrase. We call them conjunctions, except that being a conjunction is actually a function. Even though we use the word conjunction about those words, they don't seem to have other roles in the sentence than being a conjunction. Other words that could fill out that role would normally be pronouns and other things like that. The special thing about sentence knots, the definition, so to say, is that the word that assure the connection to the main clause belong to the level at the bottom of the system, not to the number 2 from above. And because conjunctions in Indo-European languages generally have the initial position, this means that one part of the bottom clause skip the intermediary layers and end up right after part 1 of the main clause, as you can see on this drawing. In the Danish example, there were different kinds of subordinate clauses, but I'll switch back to English for a discussion about the different kinds of subordinates. Okay, ready? Let's first consider some relative clauses. They are used as subordinate attachments to other things. The classical case is an adjectival relative clause attached to a noun, like who did it is raving mad, attached to the man. In that case, the role as a conjunctional is taken by the relative pronoun who, which has a typical nominal function in the subordinate. Here it is the subject. That is, it's a function that normally would be taken by a substantive or a substantive clause. And by extension, the term relative pronoun is also used in traditional grammar if the relative pro thing has an adjectival role, for instance, whose mum. But it has been surprisingly difficult for the grammarian to recognize that exactly the same situation occurs with pro words that have an adverbial function. That is, they are substitutes for adverbs that can indicate place or time or manner or whatever. The next group of subordinates is slightly more exotic, and there's no consensus about a proper name for it. I call it those independent clauses, subordinate clauses, but that's my invention. Those that look substantive-like are sometimes called independent relative clauses, but that's a result of a mix-up with constructions that replace them. Things like the man that, anybody that, and so forth, were an empty, and semantically empty substantive is used as the point of attachment for a normal relative clause. The thing that characterizes the truly independent cases is that they are not attached to a specific part of the sentence they are part of, but they take up that role themselves. For instance, whoever did it, that's the subject of the sentence. Whoever did it must be raving mad. And inside the subordinate, who or whoever is the subject of the subordinate clause. It's a little complicated. I hope you can see it when you see the examples on the page. But also here we have got an adverbial case. When he did it, that's a temporal adverb in the main clause, and inside the subordinate, the word when has the role of temporal adverbial. So in some sense, the word that is conjunctional has in both cases a similar role as the whole subordinate has in the main clause. Traditionally, these two cases would have ended up far from each other in different chapters in your grammar because one is nominal, the other is adverbial, but I can't see any reason to follow the herd unless you have to pass an exam. Then you have to rattle off the traditional rubbish if the powers that be still believe in it. The third group has three subgroups. Two of those are indirect questions. There are indirect questions with a question word on U or H. Who did it? Whose mom did it? Where did he do it? When? And so on. The second group is derived from questions of the polar kind, where you can say yes or no. Did he do it? And you can use whether, or you can use if. I don't know whether he did it. I don't know if he did it. The third group is a little different. Those are called completive in some languages, but for some reason I haven't really seen that the Anglo-Saxon grammarians have found a single word for this. It seems they avoid giving it a name, but it's a group that has the conjunction that in English, and I have looked into the history of that and its companions in both Germanic and Romance languages, and it seems that the conjunction generally comes from a demonstrative that points toward a whole sentence. I know this, he did it. So originally it didn't belong to the subordinate, and now it's seen as part of the subordinate, but in the same time it has lost its original function, and that's why we call it a conjunction. I could continue with this for a very long time, but I'll stop here. You get the idea. The important thing is to learn the transformations that convert simple sentence structures into something very complicated. If you see such a complicated sentence in an Indo-European language, then the basic rule is look for the verbs, look for the conjunctions or the words that function like conjunctions do, and then you'll get the structure. And of course, there are other instances where the main clause, so to say, isn't a clause, it's just a nominal syntagm. For instance, if I go into a shop in France and I say, bonjour madame, une baguette s'il vous plaît, then there is a sentence, but it's the subordinate, s'il vous plaît. The main clause is centered around substantive baguette, so no verb there. But the general strategy doesn't change because of a few exceptions. So organize complex sentences by looking for the verb before the verbs, and then after those look for conjunctions and words that function like conjunctions, and then you get the structure. Now we are going to look at the word order. In the preceding video I showed you Seinfeld's circles, a graphical illustration of the rules that govern the position of unstressed personal pronouns in French. This is actually a word order rule based on the notion of fixed fields near something, in this case a finite verb. Word orders can however also govern the position of the parts of a whole sentence and changes in the normal word order can indicate a changed structure and a changed meaning. For instance, many languages use inversion to transform a normal sentence into a question. Some funny things happen when this mechanism for some reason is blocked. With most verbs, inversion isn't possible in English, so instead a form of the auxiliary verb to do is used. Maybe it was the loss of case markers in Middle English that led to the restrictions on the use of inversion, I don't know. Then marginal phenomena like the emphatic use of to do changed into one of the most important mechanisms in modern English. As you know, it also turned up in negative phrases. I didn't eat the porridge. But did this occur at the same time, or did it occur as a consequence of the introduction of to-do in questions? I don't know. Maybe some of you have the answer. In Irish Gaelic, there's another problem. The verb generally stands first in any sentence, not only questions. So instead of an inversion, the Irish language has got a question marker "an," but it keeps the word order, unless, of course, the whole thing is reformulated as in the second version, which you see on the screen. And of course, we couldn't discuss word order without mentioning German. The last example here is chosen for two reasons. Alles, was heute übrig geblieben ist, sind einige Teile der Mauer. It's referring to the Berlin Wall, of course. Everything between was and ist forms a relative clause attached to the word alles, which means all, of course. The passage from alles to ist stands as a whole as a subject complement of the sentence, while einige Teile der Mauer stands as the subject of the sentence. Couldn't it be the other way round? No. Look at sind. That's the plural third person form of sein, to be, and alles is a word in the singular, so it couldn't be the subject. Quod erat demonstrandum. Actually, the whole sentence is turned around with the subject forced away from the normal position before the verb by an immensely heavy subject complement. If you run the transformation of the relative clause back to the underlying main clause, then you will see that ist moves to the left back to the normal place for the finite verb. Actually, German is noteworthy for pushing its participle to the end of the sentence, even in main clauses. Compare the English version at the bottom, and also for attaching the prefix ge if there's not another prefix. But in subordinate phrases, the finite verb is moving beyond the participle to the far end of the sentence. So it cannot surprise anybody that simultaneous interpreters have a problem with those Germans. In principle, an interpreter doesn't know what the verb in any sentence is going to be before he or she has reached the far end of it, and in formal German that can last a very long time. This basically ends this mini-series about language learning. As you can see, syntax is a very large and very diverse field of study, and you cannot possibly expect to get through all of it at one time. Look at it as a tour where you visit a large town and you find markets and you find museums and you walk around and you see things and you collect them, and at some time far in the future you have been almost everywhere and can look back on it, and then you are an advanced language learner. Goodbye.